Okay, good morning, IB Bio. This is Mr. McGee, and we're going to do a tutorial today on how to set up your photosynthesis lab. And all I'm going to give you is this data as a prompt. You're to take this and create it into a nice little table. For this lab, what we did was we measured the time it takes for discs to rise, and you can see we had 10 different discs, and these are the different amount of times it took them to rise. And as our independent variable, we did the amount of CO2. Now the other day you did your own lab and you picked your own variable, but for this one we're just going to do the amount of CO2, and you can see I use different amounts there. So to start off, before we do anything else, we'll do some organization, but notice these don't have proper decimal points. You go over here to change your decimal points. Whoops. And we go in this direction, make sure they all have the same level of precision in this case. So with that said, now let's go ahead and tidy this up by making sure we know where our mean is at, and making sure we know where our standard deviation is. Now let's go ahead here and put a box around all of these. Go up here to Gridlines, and I'm going to move through this as fast as I can because I know many of you just probably don't want to watch everything. Let's go ahead here and add a little row to the top. I'm going to click up here and right click. And again, I apologize, on MacBooks this may be a little different, so we'll see how this works out, but you cannot use Google Sheets with this. You have to use Microsoft Excel. Now what we want to do is add our title right here, and this title, I'm going to move it out just a little. This is going to be the amount of CO2 dissolved, and I only put this here to save time, and I'll just put it in there like that. Whereas our dependent variable, it's going to be the time for discs to rise, and I'll paste it in there like that. The problem is, how do I get these to fit? And there's a couple ways I can do that. One of them is I could just stretch this way out here to get that to fit, but it kind of looks tacky, or I could just do this. I bring it over and I just highlight here and then go to right click, and that's not working. Oh, right here, merge and center. I'm going to merge these two cells, and then what I'm going to do is hit this, and then I'm going to hit here this button called wrap text. That wrap text makes it fit in one box, and merge makes it kind of merge multiple cells. Likewise, I want to get all of this time for discs to rise to fit in all of these on the top, so I'm going to go up here to merge, center, and I like it nice and centered just by doing that, but again, you can pick it the way you want to do it. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a nice little shade to the top, because these are the headings up there, so I'm going to go up here to add a little gray color, and let's go ahead and add some boxes here just so it looks a little bit better. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and do another thing here. We are going to, before we do that, make sure that everything fits, which it does. Let's go ahead and center all this data by highlighting it. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and center everything. Go ahead and highlight and click like that, and everything should be centered. It just looks a lot more professional when you do that. Now that we have that done, you have everything rounded to the whole number, because after all, we are measuring this down, or plus or minus a second here. Now what we want to do is calculate the mean, and to do that, you basically can just, for any cell, go up here to function, and in this case, you can just go to all, but I have it under my most recently used, and you just click on average, and you basically just highlight the raw data, disk 1 to disk 10, and that gives you your average there. Now I could do that for each one of those, or you can do a shortcut, which is highlight the entire row across to that cell, and then that last cell you click, you go to this little special thing there, and it puts it right in there for you like that. So the other thing you can do is, once you get one cell calculated, you just copy the cell, Control C, and then you Control V and paste it. Again, on MacBooks this may be different, but the formula option up here is exactly the same, where you click on a cell, hit formula average, and you can calculate the cell. If you ever get lost, please go back in the video and see what happened. Next thing, for standard deviation, I'm going to click a cell for that. I'm going to go up here to functions, go under statistics or all, but I have it under my most recent, stdev, standard deviation. For this row, we want to highlight our raw data again. Be careful not to get the mean. We just want our raw data, and click go. Now what we're going to do is do the same for each cell, or you can just copy the one cell you did, and then you can paste it. Control C copies, Control V pastes. It looks almost done, except we have a decimal point issue. We want to have our mean and standard deviation rounded to one more decimal point than our raw data, and in this case, let's go ahead and add to 1 decimal point of precision, just like we have there. Our table looks good. We've got our independent variable here. We got our dependent variable here. and our average dependent variable, of course, being the mean. Let's go ahead and copy this graph. You just basically highlight it like this. I'm sorry, our table. And I should add another comment. You can do this too. Basically where you just highlight these cells, and you might have to do this before. I'll see if it works. But highlight a group of cells and go up here to Format, Column Width, and let's tell it we want to make a custom width of, say, 8. And let's make it a little smaller. How about 6? That's a little too small. Well, let's try 7. Your computer will be different, but I like to get it nice and small so it fits as best as possible. And again, you're free to do as you wish with that. I just kind of like it to fit. Let's go ahead and copy our table, highlight the whole thing, hit Control-C, or you just go and hit the copy button there. And then go to your Google Sheet template that you have, and down here under Table, you just got to paste it. Now, if you hit Control-V, it's going to paste it kind of like a bunch of numbers. Whereas if you paste it as a, let's see here, if you paste it like that, it's not going to work. It's just a bunch of numbers. And for some reason, it just pasted it really fine. I'm not sure why it's not going to let me paste it the way I need it to right now. Did everyone see that a minute ago? I'm not sure why it pasted it like this, but you want to find a way to paste it where it fits in there. The other option is to find a screen cropping, and again, on a MacBook, I apologize, I'm not sure how they work, but what I use is this little Windows snipping tool. I usually just come over here, worst case, and I can just snip and crop something. I'm not sure if MacBook has that option, but I'll let you guys decide because I don't want to waste your time anymore on this. Now let's go ahead and make a graph. To make a graph, you're going to go, you basically can go up here to make a graph, but first, let's tell the computer we want this to be our independent variable. Then you hold Control, and then you highlight this for your dependent variable. That's it. So highlight this, hold Control, then highlight the data for the mean. Go up here to Insert Scatterplot, and there we go. Now, you will want to modify a few things, but let's go ahead and just kind of tidy this up a little bit. We want to go to add our error bars next. These are probably the hardest thing to do, but they're not really that bad. Don't click on this button here, whatever you do. Instead, just come over to this little line over there. Click on that arrow and down to More Options for error bars. This is the same on MacBooks. Ignore anything that's happening here. Instead, come over to Custom, Specify Value, and we're going to tell it a positive standard deviation, highlight them all. And then for negative, we're going to do the same thing for standard deviation. And that will give us this. Now, for the life of me, I don't know what's with the horizontal bars. Microsoft Excel was not even explaining it when I asked him one time. So instead, you just click on the line, and then the horizontal line, and you just hit Delete on your keyboard. And that's it. I don't know why that's the case, but just kind of bear with it. Next thing you're going to need to do is create yourself a tread line. So we're going to go over here to tread line, this little option right there. Again, do not click on this. If you do that, it'll put in just a linear curve. We don't want that. Instead, just go here to tread line, the arrow, more options. Now you get to play with all these and see which one fits the best curve. Usually polynomial works best when we do a lab, but today exponential works better. When you're done with that, we want an equation because you can use this equation to calculate something later. But we also want this. Make sure you click Display R squared. These two little guys are going to be very important. Make sure you move them off to the side there because those are going to be used to tell us how good is our lab later. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to clean up your axes a little bit. For example, we don't want this to be counting up every 10th. That's just kind of wasted space. So you go up here and you go to axes, and you just go over here. Let's go to vertical, or go to more options here. Let's go to, sure. Yep, I'm on vertical options here, or horizontal options. What we're going to do is we want it to go all the way to 0.4, not 0.45. So let's tell it 0, and for some reason you have to enter it because it makes it manual. And let's go to 0.4. And for our major units, you know, we could just have it skip like that, or you could do whatever you want, but it looks fine like that. So I'm going to leave it. And that's pretty much it. It looks pretty good there. Okay, now what we're going to try to do is get the axis kind of straightened out and whatnot. So to do this, we're going to go over here to Axis Titles. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on this because I want a title for both of these here. And your title should be pretty much exactly what's on your table listed as your independent and dependent variable. The difference is your dependent variable, instead of it just saying, for example, time for disk to rise to surface, and of course we want our unit and uncertainty. By the way, on Windows it's Alt plus 0177 gives you that plus or minus logo, or you could just do it whatever you want to. Now what I was getting at is, instead of just putting the same thing you put on your dependent variable on your table, or I'm sorry, on your graph, it's not the time, it's actually the average or the mean time. So we're going to have to add that in front of it. Make sure you're aware of that and you see what I just mentioned there. Instead of it saying the exact same thing as it is on the table, we're only doing the mean time for the disk to rise. And on the horizontal x-axis, we're going to write the same thing. Amount of CO2 dissolved in 300 milliliters of water. Okay? And now what you're going to want to do is probably click on it and get it straight. You can always go up here to bold and change the font size if you want to. I will leave that to your discretion. This is all part of being a good scientist and trying to find what works for you, but make sure it looks nice. I probably made this a little too big, but I'm just trying to do this video in a hurry here. And again, as this kind of whole thing gets to be a mess, you can always resize your graph like this and make it fit. But you will need to do one last thing here, and that is a chart title. Go ahead here and put a title. I'm going to let you pick the title because I want you to think about what is a good title for a graph of this nature. And again, make sure that you have your calculations right there. And the only last thing else I want to mention is we probably don't want these grid lines. Now to get rid of them, you could just click on it and delete, or you go over here to grid lines and just click and get rid of them. I personally don't like them, not unless I'm using graphing paper or something like that, but you could pretty much do as you wish. But this is a nice table. As you can see, everything's pretty good. We can always tweak a little thing, such as clicking on a data point like this. If I click on one, well, it's not letting me do it. Click on one here, you can go to color change and marker, and you can change the size of the circles if you want to. I will let you guys play with this if you want to do that, you know, including changing the color of this. You know, I'll let you guys play with this more if you want to, and you can change line color, anything you want, but just kind of keep in mind this is what a good table or good graph looks like. Now in order to copy and paste this, you are going to have to click on it and copy it. Whatever you do, do not click in the middle because it'll just copy this. Click on the outside of the graph, Control-C copies, and then in our lab report here we go down to Control-V, which is paste. And it's nice to get it nice and centered like that, so looks like we have everything there. We can try to straighten it all out when we're done and get it to fit a little bit better. But one last thing I want to show you before we get to all this is this part of your lab report, which is called a t-test. To do a t-test, it's actually not as hard as it sounds, but it is very similar to a chi-square test. It's going to tell us the probability that something is random. And if you remember a chi-square test, it's that p-value 0.05. If it's smaller than that, that means we got good results. To do a t-test, I'm going to actually move our graph off the screen here for a minute. To do a t-test, you're basically comparing any two things. I could do an example, say, do girls run faster than boys? Doesn't matter. In this case, I'm going to compare my control group results with any other group, and in this case, let's probably best to compare it with the most extreme group down here, but you could compare it with any two. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, did the amount of CO2 differ between the control and this extreme group here? Was there a significant difference, or was it random that they had a difference here? Now, clearly, we agree that this is probably a huge difference between these two means. But again, we do not want to rely on opinion when you're doing a science lab report. You want to rely on hard numbers. That's why we have this t-test. To do this t-test, you click on a random cell, go up here to f of x, and then you just go up here and look for the t-test. I'm going to go under all, and it should say t-test. And I believe it's under statistical too. Let's see here, t-test. T-test. Click on that option, and here's what you're going to need to do now. you're going to need for array 1, highlight the raw data just for that first group. For array 2, what do you think you highlight? You guessed it, the raw data for the other group you want to compare. And again, we're seeing, is the difference significant or not? Now, we could talk about tails and types later, but in a nutshell, usually it is 2, and usually it's going to be 2, and usually it's going to be 3, but in this case it's going to be 2 and 2. Okay, go ahead and hit enter, and as you can see, that is a pretty big number there. In fact, if I type this number out, I think it's, and that is our number right there. As you can tell, it's pretty small. If that number is smaller than 0.05, it is a significant difference. It is not the result of random chance. So we can for sure say that with extreme probability, this is significantly different than this group. You could do a t-test between any two groups, but again, it tells you, is there a significant difference? I think we can agree that this is very likely significant, and I think almost anyone would agree there's a pretty good drop here. The reason we're bringing this up is because of this. Your conclusions. When you write up your conclusion, you must be able to cite data. Do not use your opinion. You must be able to cite trends, error bars, deviations. Make sure you're using a t-test to cite. That t-test is your weapon against, well, I don't even know how I could phrase that, but it's basically your tool to tell everybody that you know that your lab result produced something, okay? Discussions is really where you have an opinion. You can talk about anything you want to, but don't confuse a conclusion with a discussion. With that said, let's get some nice data. I, again, sincerely apologize if you are using the MacBooks and they are difficult or different than Windows. But again, if you can't figure it out, then this just becomes homework. But get as much done as you can today, and I will see you in class.